It's an interesting challenge for a sales leader, right? Because again, to your point, oftentimes sales leaders are promoted from within, and they don't necessarily have the coaching or leadership skills. Just because somebody was a top contributor or individual performer, they were President's Club winner or whatever, and we're going to make you head of sales now, but they've never led a team of 100 people, as an example, or even 20 people.
At Elements of Culture, we sit down with experts in leadership and team building to explore the DNA that drives a thriving organization.
Hello, Mark, and welcome to Elements of Culture. It's awesome to have you on. I obviously know a lot about your story. We've connected multiple times, but why don't you give the listeners a 101 on your story, your incredible background, and then we can dive straight in on all things Sales 101.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. Thanks for having me. So my name is Mark Zides. I'm a business consultant that's been an entrepreneur a few times throughout my career, but also worked in management consulting. So I have an interesting lens and background from working in large consulting firms like a PwC or a Deloitte that was once Monitor, as well as having my own startups, right, in between sort of those roles. So over the 30 years I've been in business, I've had an interesting background where I've been in a startup culture, but I've also been in a consulting culture. So had the strong understanding of what it takes to grow those types of businesses. And I have an interesting lens around how to drive sales, how to drive revenue, and how to coach people to be better leaders, throughout that journey.
I love that. So are you more of a PwC or more of like a startup guy?
That's a great question. Someone asked me that the other day. They said, what would you rather do, be another startup
Yeah,
guy?
no, I'm truly intrigued because I can't deal with the big corporate companies.
Yeah, I like big corporations are great, right? They're just super successful, and they hire and they bring on really smart people. In a matrix organization like that, it's you have to be a team and collaborative person, to kind of help drive performance, help drive sales, help win new customers. When you're on your own, when you're building a startup, it gets to the whole scrappy, and you need the grit, and you might miss payroll, and when you're working at PwC or Ernst & Young, you don't have to worry about missing payroll, right? So when you're in a startup environment, it's a lot different from a mindset perspective. And so to answer your question, long-winded, I actually like the startup thing because it's just, you control your own destiny more per se, right? So you can actually, drive a business, build a business. But as it's 7 or 8 out of 10 startups fail. So there's a large risk tolerance between the two, so you have to have an interesting, background and kind of experience set to be a startup person.
Yeah, 100%. It's interesting, isn't it? Like that payroll thing and that nerve-wracking thing of like, okay, it's literally month on month and no one actually understands how little the runway is with these startups. I definitely didn't at the start of my career. But then you do control everything in the sense that like promotions are accelerated, your learning's accelerated. Whereas I guess the difference is like you are in a scenario where you have to almost like prove yourself and then work up, I guess, like the food chain, really. So it's just an interesting dynamic. I always speak to my friends about the difference because I just got chucked into the startup life, and I think that I could never now think about just being like in the corporate world based on like how quickly the startup life you can accelerate.
Right. I completely agree. I really do. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah. So let's just go to, in terms of like driving these startup businesses, right? Because I love this. I think this is super interesting. So in your career or in your past, what does that look like for you? So you've obviously been the founder, you've had some successful exits. Like when we just break down like the whole go-to-market function, like where does it start? How do you drive it? We'd just love to get your perception on that for anyone that's like kind of got a product that doesn't really know about the go-to-market side, right? We work with a lot of people that have got this amazing product and they've got the tech and they know how to code and stuff, but the go-to-market side just seems super foreign to them.
Yeah, it's a great question. So it all starts with an idea, right? So whether you're a technologist and you have a technology idea, or you're, consulting a service person, you have a service idea, or you have a brick and mortar idea, right? So, you start with the idea, but then I think that the most important thing is product market fit, right? So you have to know that there's a need in the market, right? Where somebody wants to, pay money for your product or service. So that's the fundamental thing from an entrepreneurial perspective, is to make sure that that's a fit there. You have an MVP, you have a solution that actually people want to buy. And then to get a paid customer or someone that actually, wants to work with you is really critical, right? When it comes to starting a business. So when I would start my businesses, it was really on the on the back of whether it was market timing. I thought there was an opportunity to go do something based on where the market was. And in the first business that I started, I was working for a subsidiary of IBM, and I was really successful. I was fortunate enough to be the top salesperson there. I had a great territory, had great mentors. But from there, I said to myself, well, what's next? I'd have to go into management or go into a different role, which I was flattered by. But I'm like, you know what? I think I can do this better myself. I want to try this, and I want to go out and people are like, well, you work for, again, ultimately IBM or at a subsidiary of IBM. Why would you ever want to leave? I said, you know what? I just think I can be more nimble. I can be more flexible. I can be more creative. And those are some of the, tendencies and drivers that help make entrepreneurs, who they are, right? You got to know how to pivot, and you got to, know how to make a customer happy. So that's really what I've learned throughout my career over the 3, startups I've had. I've had a few others that failed. Or I've been, passive investors, I'd say, where someone else, I'd start it with somebody and we'd hand the keys over to somebody else to kind of run it. So that's been an interesting model too. But I wouldn't call myself a serial entrepreneur, but I've, started and operated a few different businesses, and it's been a lot of fun. But a lot of it, is around market timing and really what niche that you can bring to, the people that you have relationships with.
Yeah, this is super interesting. I could honestly speak about this topic for hours because, I think there's a massive difference between product market fit and then just having 5 or 10 really happy customers because you solve a solution for those specific customers rather than an actual product market fit. So here's a question, because this is just what's cropped up, is obviously you've got founder-led sales, right? So you've got an idea, you then have product market fit, and you then have your initial raving fans, testing customers kind of thing. At what point do you think it's validated enough to then be okay, here's my first sales rep, or here's my second sales rep, or then bringing in and actually building that go-to-market motion? I know it's very contextual, right? But I think people get it wrong, and they get it too soon, or they either get it too late. And it's really hard to understand when you've achieved product market fit and that you should get out of the sales process yourself, because obviously you cannot scale if you're a founder in the sales process.
Yeah, that's where, the timing of scaling a business and taking it to the next level comes, right? So, the way you ask that question is really interesting, because some businesses can be founder-led, like you said, where the founder is the face of the franchise or the business, and the customers are buying from them, right? So, and that's a hard business to scale, right? Because there's only so many hours in the day. So to be able to build a business in a framework, in a structure where you can then take the next level and go hire a team, and go scale the business and go rinse repeat per se around what your product or service is a really critical juncture in a business. So with that, you have to have, to me, either paying customers, or you have to have a great idea that somebody wants to invest in. So somebody wants to be an investor, a seed investor, or an early stage investor, or friends and family investor. And that gets a little tricky and risky, because, if you want to ask friends and family for money, if the business fails, you have that dynamic that potentially comes in. If you have actually a really strong idea and you want to go after venture capital, that's another approach. So that's where, to answer your question directly, Laura, which is, again, another good one, is, once you get to scale, right? I'd say once you get to, 4 or 5 paid customers, or you see traction in the market, or, you have some partnerships that have aligned well, where people are actually OEMing or reselling your product, or you have a good distribution channel. There's so many different, ways to kind of think about how to scale a business. That's when you say, hey, let's build a team, right? Let's build people, let's bring people in. And that's where you have to decide, what type of people do you want? What type of salespeople do you want? Again, are you selling a product? Are you selling a service? Are you selling, something that's more unique? In the world of AI now, it's really changed the whole dynamic of kind of how companies go to market. So the whole go to market is now much more automated than it was even a few years ago, never mind 10 years ago when you started a business.
It's actually insane, because what I hear from what you're saying before we go into the actual sales team is lead diversification at the top level, right? So if you have different distribution channels, that gives you lead diversification, and that's the number one metric that investors look for anyway, that and your LTV and etc. But If you can have enough pipeline, but coming from multiple different areas, then that gives you a massive market validation. But what's super interesting is a couple of years ago, it was actually a lot easier to cold outbound because you could be really different. Like you could LinkedIn voice note, you could send a video on LinkedIn. Whereas now you can literally streamline that whole process, that it makes it less personalized. But I also think on the other end, the people that are really good at it and the people that use AI, there'll be a clear difference between like mediocre, like SDRs, so to speak, and top end. But I guess what I'm trying to say is if you can build a business where you've got like referral partners and like partnerships, you've got like an outbound play, you've got then like a content play where you're speaking to your constant ICP the whole time. You then have like a flywheel of organic that can give you inbound over time. I feel like if you can build that up, plus like your first 4 to 5 customers, at that point, I feel like that's where I'll be like, okay, now you're starting to track between like some solid product market fit.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's omni-channel. It's multiple channel. It's based on, what type of business or service you're in, right? I mean, obviously, social selling is huge now, right? Again, that didn't even exist a few years ago.
I know.
LinkedIn, I think, is 15 years old now. So again, people are obviously selling through LinkedIn, DMing people. Now, look, it's challenging because if you're a salesperson, a lot of people are doing that, right? So, what are the sales motions or what are the go-to-market motions? And a lot of it, again, depending on the type of solution that you're selling or service, it's really understanding the sales cycle, understanding the dynamic of how your product fits or competes with something else. What's the hook that you have that is going to make a buyer or an ICP want to speak to you versus somebody else, right? And sales is all about relationships, right? It's all about tenacity and communication and resilience and all of that, kind of outward, which is what you're really good at. I mean, you have to have that. You have to be able to understand no is no. It's you have to be able to accept no, but then you have to figure out, okay, well, why did I get the no? The next time I'm going to try something else, and you can't get down on yourself because maybe you had a bad day because you didn't get any appointments or meetings or whatever, or you lost a deal. And so being a salesperson or go to market is very, very challenging from my experience.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like it destroyed me for like 3 years being a sales rep because like the anxiety of like not having exactly what you just said. But then I actually trained my brain into actually wanting the no's and treating it like a sales process and like, okay, this was a bad day, but that's actually part of the process. So that's great. We're getting closer, or like all that kind of stuff. And if you change like the whole control illusion within your brain and flip the narrative, it's actually an incredibly lucrative career if you can manage the mindset. Like I'm so passionate about the fact that like that you've got, everyone seems to over-index on talent, right? Everyone's like, where can I find these like A players? Where can I find these like the 4 or 5 people that are going to take us to 1 billion when the rest can just be at like 60%? Like everyone's always gunning for them. Whereas I actually feel like if 50% of it is the talent, of course, but if you actually do the vehicle as the other 50%, and the vehicle being how to optimize that person and actually how to get them to the next level in a clear process that's actually worked and proven that it's worked, is just as successful and just less time consuming than going out and trying to find these top reps. And a lot of that is training these people that like literally it's fine if you get a no, like you want to welcome them because it's part of the process.
I love that. Yeah, I love the vehicle analogy, right? I mean, you have the driver, right, of the car, and then you have the vehicle, right? So you have the process, which has to work. So that's where, when you go back to large companies or more established companies, if you're a CRO of a software company, you have your A players and your B players. Hopefully you don't have any C players. And how do you train up, those people to all be A players, right? And a lot of those individuals, don't really have the experience that they need. So they need a mentor, they need a coach. So I think, people like you or companies that you work with are really good from a standpoint of, being a sales coach, kind of implementing those, sales tactics and sort of that mindset. I think a lot of it starts with the mindset, right? You have to you have to wake up every day saying, I'm going to go win the day. I'm actually going to go win some customers, and you have to be positive regardless of what the outcome can be. And that's where you have to start, right? So that's really what you need to do with sales. Now you need a plan, you need a territory, you need to go to market. Yeah. But go ahead, sorry.
No, I'm just agreeing.
Yeah, I just get really passionate about it. I think that's why we're aligned on this stuff. Yeah, because if I put my sales coaching hat on, I look at consulting firms, and this is where, I'm looking to kind of coach and help some large consulting firms. They have incredibly smart people, right? partners that have been at these big consulting firms or boutique consulting firms for many, many years, really, really successful because they have really deep relationships with the buyers, right? So if you're a consulting firm like one of the big four, and you're talking to C-level people, right? You're solving all these huge problems. But for them to grow their business as a practitioner, they don't necessarily know how to do that. And it's not a bad thing. They just don't. They're not trained on kind of how to take $1 million account to a $2 million account. And that's something that you and I are really good at. So how do you build a plan around that, right? How do you cross-sell? How do you bring other people in your organization to the table, if you have multiple service lines or multiple things, how do you build an account plan? How do you look at a company and say, okay, let's look at the x-ray of this business. We're in this one business center, we're in the HR stack, right? Okay, we can sell, these services there, but what about supply chain? What about finance? What about compliance? What about sales? Like if you sell training, for example, you can argue that everyone in the company needs to get trained, whether it's the CEO or the C-level folks need, I don't know if they're going to get formal training, but they need executive coaches, right? So from the top of the house all the way to new hires, the new hires, guess what? When you get hired, you get training, right?
Yes,
how do you work within the context of the company? What are the skills you need to build? But then everyone in the middle needs constant development, whether you do it on your own or whether you do it through somebody, or you bring in a company like yours to kind of come into a sales organization and help them understand how to build their book of business is critical to a company's success and growth.
Literally. It's actually insane to me because, and I'd love to hear what you think of this theory, but like, I actually believe, and like I've built companies and whatever, and I'm obsessed with sales. I read about sales. I think I'm more obsessed with it because it changed my life and I was just so rubbish at school, right? So it's like, I was never going to be a doctor or a lawyer. I was never going to work for the big five, but I also didn't realize that was this whole other world that you could earn equally just the same amount and 3, 4, 5 exit in a world that you could like use your personality and like work ethic, right? But like, I genuinely believe in a business is like, within like the talent pool of people, you have three buckets. When you've got those top, like the 10Xers or whatever anyone wants to call them, the A players or the multipliers or whatever, they need coaching, but more importantly, they need like growth coaching. So they need to understand where they're going, what vehicle they use your business as a vehicle to get them there. But more importantly, they need like the sexiest comp plan in the world that's going to make it impossible for them to leave. So really with that bucket, all you're doing is making it impossible for them to ever want to leave, but also getting them to their next stage in their career. Whereas like the middle ones, as long as they're coachable and follow a process, I actually think it's a leadership issue rather than an individual contributor issue, because a lot of the times I go into these organizations and they think it's like their reps are like it's a rep problem, and I'm like, well, they're coachable, they're hardworking, and they will understand and learn. So then actually it's a leadership issue on how to kind of get them to that next player, but then that leadership might have just been promoted from a top performer and it's a whole new role and doesn't know how to coach and doesn't really know themselves how they've been so successful. So like, how do you then coach that if you don't really know yourself? And then the bottom ones, like you mentioned earlier about the C players, is like, I see that more as like, if you do have them, we all do mishires, etc. It's just about either navigating them somewhere in the organization that suits them better or helping them get their next job. But you shouldn't really put any time really down there. But I do believe if you have the right vehicle for those middle performers, they can get up to those like 10Xs, so to speak.
I agree with you. Yeah, I agree. It's an interesting challenge for a sales leader, right? Because again, to your point, oftentimes sales leaders are promoted from within, and they don't necessarily have the coaching or leadership skills. Just because somebody was a top contributor or individual performer, they were President's Club winner or whatever, and we're going to make you head of sales now, but they've never led a team of 100 people, as an example, or even 20 people. So what I would say to that is training is absolutely paramount, but you also need, as an organization, a playbook, a sales playbook, right? So you need to be able to have, the ability to communicate what works and what doesn't work within the context of your organization, you go to market. And go to markets change all the time, right? So I feel like sales and marketing need to communicate better, right? Because if marketing's not telling sales what they're doing from a lead generation perspective, that can be, a challenge. Okay, well, where are the leads coming from? Am I supposed to, find my own leads? If I'm a sales rep, what's my territory? So there's a lot of dynamics that go into kind of, sales pursuits and sales performance.
Yeah, it's super interesting because I honestly feel a bit sorry for some leaders that are top like promoted. And also, don't even get me started on the team lead role where you're still on quota and still have to coach and develop. But like what we see happen all the time, and like the business that we're building here at New Well is kind of just gone in this way because it's what the market wants and it's the appetite, right? But you seem to have a lot of coaching for the ICs. There seems to be objection handling. There seems to be just like everything out there that they could need, and there's almost too many resources, and what's right or wrong is actually really hard to understand. But with the leadership, like the middle line leadership's a really interesting role because they might only get like 1 or 2 meetings a month with the CRO or even the VP if they're just like a frontline leader. But their whole roles completely changed from having all that energy and momentum within speaking to people to then actually just all they have to do is quality control all day. Because realistically, that's all they should be doing is quality control, coaching, and making sure that the deals are getting to where they need to be, which is actually a completely different role. But there's no kind of like, there doesn't seem to be that like emphasis on that middle level management, albeit if you get it right, that will then change like a group of 10 AEs that you might have below you, you know? It's really interesting. Right.
Yeah, I think it all depends on the size of the business, Laura, right?
Yeah.
Because again, if you're a startup and you have a couple of salespeople, you can be really like a high touch leader, right? Even if in a startup, a couple of new sales reps report right to the CEO, maybe the CEO hasn't hired a CRO yet, right, or a head of sales. So that dynamic would be different versus a company that's more mature and they have a true sales organization. What I've seen work a lot of times in organizations is sort of a mentor-mentoree model, right? Yeah. Where if someone's a sales rep, they might be aligned with a pre-sales person, for example, who's been there longer, or they might be aligned with a senior salesperson. So there's a lot of team selling that goes on that can be helpful in let's say a SaaS or software business. In a professional service firm, it's very different, or in a marketing firm. So a lot of those pursuits are very joint oriented and team pursuit, right? So you have teams, you have the practitioners, you have the subject matter experts, you have the salesperson, you have the marketing person, you have the technical person, and they all kind of pursue an engagement or an opportunity together or a pitch together. And that's kind of an interesting thing to kind of go through, that you don't necessarily go through when you're in a startup. But when I sat at a big consulting firm, that's the way those guys went after a company. It's just a much different process, a much different approach. Some work, some don't. But again, when you want to go win a new deal, you have to have your best foot forward, and you actually have the best solution, whether it's what your product or service is or pricing, right? And we can have a whole other podcast on pricing and how to win new work and all that stuff. But let's keep it high level now for now.
I honestly have such an opinion on pricing. I'm like, if you're dropping your pricing, you failed in discovery. Like, truly, that's what I believe. Like, I just feel like there should literally be no negotiation because you should have got all of the metrics in discovery that you can quantify so easily the pain of them not moving forward with you. So it all goes back to discovery for me. But I could talk about a B2B sales process all day, every day. I went into like the high ticket space, and I'm back into like the B2B SaaS corporate space, and I love the sales process because it is a process and you can learn the process and then you just understand it and it's pretty easy. But yeah, the pricing thing's interesting. So in terms of like building businesses, in terms of once you've got the value, you've got the product market fit, and then you're building your go-to-market teams, in your world and what you've seen work really well, does that look like to you just hiring a few sales reps and then scaling and building from there? Or what does that look like for you now? We've got product market fit, we've got our first 5 to 10 customers, and we're starting to like get some real traction here.
Yeah, I think it's, you got to go find, like you said, it's all about the talent, right? So you have to find somebody that understands your market, understands your product. What I my cheat code in this world is try to find somebody who's got a Rolodex. So, try to find somebody who has the relationships already so they can hit the ground running. But I will say, a nice balance to that would be a younger professional, right? So who's been in a sales role or a strong training role. So there's some great companies out there where people that come right out of, say, industry, or college or right out of school will work for like an ADP, for example, right? Or, enterprise rent-a-car. It sounds crazy, but a lot of those people get put into these incredible training programs, and they learn how to sell. They learn pipeline management. They learn how to cold call. They learn all the nuts and bolts of sales. And then if they're successful there, those folks can then move into like a SaaS or kind of a next sort of relationship type sale. So if you have a startup, from my opinion, and you're small and you only have a budget for a couple people, my recommendation would be more of a senior person who's got the experience, and then bring in somebody who's got the tenacity and sort of the energy to kind of dial for dollars per se, even though dial for dollars isn't the same as it was, 10 years ago.
I know it's super interesting to me because like this whole like young person role, I feel like if you get it right can be pivotal to like the business, because like a lot of like younger than me, I guess, but they're hungry, right? They're hungry for a role, and I watch a lot of podcasts, and I listen to a lot of I guess wealthy people speak on some interesting podcasts, but there's actually like a really quick way to get pretty wealthy and learn a lot, and it's if you do have those attributes that you've just said as like a younger person, and you attach yourself to someone that's not going to pay you a lot, but they're building a business that's clearly going to be successful, where you can just learn and like literally digest all of it, and then somehow end up on like some higher level of profit share, or like a higher level of commission, or like in a long-term play. If you can like sustain something like that and get into a business early, which is just like what you're talking about, from a founder that knows what they're doing, from a founder that may have done it before, that you can basically be like cheap labor to them when they don't have the budget, but you're going to produce the results, and then from there they can coach, train, and you're like their right-hand person. Right. I think is a really unique role, but like no one really talks about it that much, but that feels like to me the cheat code, because it's all about learning at that age anyway, just getting your network as wide as possible and learning as much as possible, and then like money will come once you've got those two things. Right. But imagine being able to like tie yourself to a successful founder that doesn't have like 150k or 200k OTE to pay you, but has had proven success where you can learn all this. Your network's building. You're starting to build like loads of profit. You might move on to profit share. I mean, I honestly feel like that's the quickest way to success if you're like, I don't know, early 20s, just like looking for a big break or something like that.
Yeah, it's an awesome overview you just said, and then I'll simplify and say what I've done successfully in the last couple of companies that I've built is, excuse me, I've hired. Sorry about that. In the last couple of companies that I've built, I've hired a chief of staff.
Nice.
So that role is a chief of staff role, and it's basically a lieutenant for me and the leadership team, right? So it's somebody that not only they may not have the sales skills, but they have the communication skills, and they're willing to get their feet wet. They're willing to do anything to help. So to your point, they're willing to get immersed in the business and learn whatever it takes. Oh, hey, can you send an invoice out? Great. Like they'll learn how to figure out how to. Yeah, like
it's changed the game. Yeah. We've got a chief of staff, but we call him director of people operations, whatever name that you want to call it. But his ability to like, it's almost like I've got my own solution sales engineer that can create me decks out of Canva that I've never even, I'm so black and white, right? So then he edits all of our content. Then he like makes sure that the exec doc's always uploaded, all the team meetings are going ahead. Then he does all of the contracts. He's on with our attorneys to make sure that we're completely like legally bounded. And I'm just like, I don't understand. Like, you must have the funnest role ever, because sometimes you're with me and sometimes you're on my LinkedIn and then sometimes you're doing all this. But this company that we're building now is like my third run, so to speak. There's two things that we're doing massively different. We're building a brand around the business, because my first ever business, if I would have built a brand around it, that's just like the biggest mistake I ever didn't make. So that's a key takeaway for the listener. But the second thing is, you get a hire like that, there's not even necessarily like has to be a C-suite chief of staff, but someone that's clever and intelligent enough to be able to do creative stuff while you're building that brand in-house, because then they're like, they want to work with you, they've got a promotion tracker. It's just so much better in-house than outsourcing, but can do all of these other things, plus keep the culture and the transparency and like the radical, like just being so radically honest with each other, and host like really big leadership meetings. I actually think that's more pivotal than a bloody revenue role.
I agree. Yeah, I think when you're building the foundation, to have that person in a startup is critical to its success. 100% agree.
And I never had it. And you literally just said chief of staff, and I went, I don't really get what that role is. And then everything that you were making, I was like, oh my God, I'm doing that this time.
Yeah, it's a critical role. And look, I mean, that person may not become a salesperson, but they understand the sales process, right? Because they're working alongside the founder or other people, because they're building decks and they're sitting in on calls and they're kind of listening to pitch. And yeah, it's a critical role in my opinion in a startup. I think, and again, you look at successful entrepreneurs and successful people that have built businesses and exited, you look at their team and or you go on LinkedIn, you're like, geez, they have a chief of staff, they have somebody that, or people operations, or somebody that kind of, keeps all the glue together internally.
That's literally him. And it's so funny because I actually believe when you're building a startup, and this is so funny because the first one we built, if I ever get married, there'll literally be a table dedicated to them because we're still so close, because the trauma that you go through. And I'm going to one of their weddings in 2 weeks. And we met on Zoom, we built a business together. I mean, it's literally West Coast of America to UK. I mean, I literally going to a different day. But it's crazy, that kind of bond that you get with people. And I think that's a huge part of I think it's also useful to share is everyone's like, oh, if your employees saying you're a family, then they're doing it wrong. I do kind of get that in big corporate companies. But if you have that family, 5 or 4 to 5 people where you've got that killer sales rep that can build the whole go-to-market, you have the founder, you have the chief of staff, you have the tech guy, and then you might have another sales rep on commission or something, but you have those 4 to 5 in the exec team to begin with. If they are literally like a family, that is exactly what's going to attract top talent, because that's where it's the most fun you'll ever have, because it's like working with your best friends every day. B, you just then want to do everything to help them because they are like your family. And I just feel like that's if that's the ultimate competitive advantage, if you can create a team like that as your founding team.
Yeah, completely agree. Love that model. Yep.
That is what I'm super passionate about. But I know we're going over time and I've taken up loads of your time, but just in with all your success, and I'd love to wrap with just any key lessons learned or anything that you can share with our listeners that you feel like you may have wanted to know before you started the companies, or anything about the go-to-market side that keeps coming up that resonates with you before we end.
Yeah, there's nothing that really comes up. I mean, it's really a journey, right? When you start a business or you're a consultant, or you hang a shingle and you go out on your own, you have to do your research. You have to have, again, we talked about mindset at the beginning. You have to have a clear approach to kind of how you measure success, right? Some people hey, I want a lifestyle business, right? So I want the work-life balance, and
100%.
It's okay to just have yeah, that's okay. If you want a lifestyle business and you want to work 20 hours a week, but you enjoy it and you travel and get to spend time with your family and friends, great. But if you want to build something and work, 15 hours a day and go build it toward an exit or towards another event, then, it takes a really special person to kind of, build that again, go to market and approach to be successful.
Yeah, honestly, I completely agree. And the whole lifestyle thing, I just want to say, is never a negative. I work with a lot of clients or a lot of customers where whatever your goal is, you just have to reverse engineer that and there'll be a pathway to get there. But I've seen people way happier on 200, 300, 400K a year, where they have 5 to 10 clients that they know that they can help, that continuously keep renewing, than people that are exiting their companies for over $1 billion.
Right.
It's interesting, that one. But Mark, this has been awesome. It's been so much fun. You're great. We're lucky to have you on. And looking forward to seeing how this all comes out.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, Laura. It was fun.
Thanks, Mark.